Hello and welcome to the CIDDL Research and Practice Brief. The purpose of this series is to have a conversation around innovative use of technology in special education, early childhood, related services, leadership personnel preparation programs. Today, we're joined by Dr. Joshua Wilson. Dr. Wilson is an Associate Professor of Education at the University of Delaware School of Education and a faculty affiliate of University of Delaware's AI Center for Excellence and Center for Research in Education and Social Policy. As a foremost expert in the field of automated writing evaluation, Dr. Wilson's research positions him at the forefront of integrating AI technologies in assessment and instruction to enhance educational outcomes. His research focuses specifically on the ways that automation and AI can be used to transform the teaching and learning of writing. A former special education teacher, Dr. Wilson remains focused on improving outcomes for students struggling to learn and on preparing teachers ready to make a difference in the lives of all of their students. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
So let's dive right in. My first question, what issues are you trying to address through your work with automated scoring and writing?
Sure. They're personal. They started personal because I remembered the students that I had as a teacher who were fourth graders and writing at a first grade level, and I didn't have the tools that I needed to help them or the training. So I was told to give an assessment, and it didn't provide me the kind of information I needed to guide my instruction. And so that experience of when I was a special education teacher has really guided my career, where I've been looking at ways that technology, particularly automation and automated writing evaluation, and now generative AI, can support the teaching, learning, and assessment of writing, believing that when we understand through assessment why a student is struggling or the areas where they're struggling, we can sort of be more targeted and effective with the instruction that we apply. So that's, in a nutshell, I'm thinking about those students, but on a broader scale, I'm thinking about how do we help the millions of students who struggle with writing in our country and beyond, and how do we give teachers the tools they need to be able to be the most effective they can with the instruction they provide. So sort of a diagnostic lens and formative assessment approach.
Can you walk us through how your work with automated scoring supports students with disabilities?
Sure. So in a couple ways, I've done research that shows how automated writing evaluation, automated scoring, and automated feedback can support students with disabilities included in the general education classroom. So with that caveat in mind, that these are students who are included in the general education setting, at least to some degree. So on the one hand, I've looked at scoring. In multi-tiered systems of support frameworks, previously called response intervention or RTI, a foundation of those systems, those prevention intervention systems, is universal screening. It's been traditionally very difficult for districts of any sort of size to be able to implement universal screening for writing because it's simply too time consuming and costly to assess an entire district. And we're talking maybe, I'm thinking now at like third graders and up, where they're actually writing like a paragraph length or more. And it's just too, yeah, like I said, it's just too time consuming. By the time they would get that information back, it might be a month later. Especially if you want to do that with any sort of reliability, when you're getting multiple humans to score together and not just having the teacher do it. We might want to have at least some sort of a reliability check, which typically means having at least two people look at it, or at least some proportion of the students' essays being looked at by more than one person. And then that takes not only time, but cost. So are they getting trained? Where does that cost come from? Where does that time cost come from? Is it happening outside of school? So it just becomes very impractical and infeasible for districts to sort of implement these systems. And it gets even harder as you move up into middle school. Alternatively, you can use things like curriculum-based measurement, but even those are hard to score and still time-consuming, and they don't really provide the best inference about a student's writing skills, I would argue, because you're really looking solely at a very narrow uh, skill set that CBM elicits, mostly writing fluency. So I've looked at how automated scoring can sort of address those logistical and psychometric and assessment challenges. How can we use something that's completely 100% consistent to and provide scores immediately at scale, whether you have 10 students or 100,000 students, we can get those scores back to the district immediately as soon as they're done. That's opens up a whole new possibility for getting these multi-tiered systems of support in place where we can take assessment data and then connect it with intervention data to support the students who are showing signs of struggling before it's too late. So we don't want our my fourth graders to be writing. We don't want to have them be writing at a first grade level. It's just, we shouldn't be intervening in fourth grade. We should be doing that much earlier. And I think about eighth graders writing at a fifth grade level, things like that. So automated scoring really opens up that opportunity to address those barriers. And I've done research looking at the promise of automated scoring for universal screening. I've done a couple different papers looking at it. And it does show promise. It's pretty accurate. It's comparably accurate to curriculum-based measures, and it provides a whole suite of other benefits. On the feedback side, I've looked at how automated feedback, which is the use of computer-generated feedback, which is suggestions to improve an essay, how computer-generated feedback can support productive revision. So how can students, after they write their first draft, they get their computer-generated automated feedback, can they use that to actually improve their writing? So I did a study where I looked at how students with disabilities included in a general education setting compared to, these are basically students with IEPs, compared to students without IEPs, or typically developing students. What we found is that their first drafts were of the students with disabilities were much lower in quality than their peers. But the students with disabilities were able to productively use automated feedback actually more rapidly increase the quality of their essays than typically developing students, such that after 3 or 4 revisions, the quality of their writing was you couldn't discriminate that from typically developing students. So suggesting that this could be a real boon and facilitator of the growth of students with disabilities writing quality as they write and revise. So basically, to sum up, I've looked at how scoring and the unique capabilities of automation can support automated scoring at scale for universal screening and benchmarking. And I've looked at, in a classroom setting, in a sort of more task-based setting, how the feedback that those systems can provide can support growth in the quality of the writing that those students do.
How do we better prepare educators to use these technologies when they're in the field?
That's a great question. And yeah, even in my own program, I have not really been involved in training teacher educators or future educators how to use these tools. I don't tend to teach the course where they're used, and I haven't really thought about it. So if I'm not doing it, I'm not sure who is. So yeah, there's definitely a gap there. And I think that gap is all the more alarming given the age of AI that we're in now with generative AI, because we're in this spot now where it's possible that the future of the writing process is going to be forever changed with these generative AI tools. So how do we teach teachers to teach students to use tools that they have never used or don't know how to use themselves? So it is this challenge now of professional learning and professional development and upskilling teachers. I don't think I have the answer for you, but I do underscore the need. And I do think those skills can be taught. It's not that it can't be taught. I think I think that we know what works with professional learning. I think for sure it can be embedded in coursework. I can imagine it being embedded within special education coursework too around, teaching literacy for sure. Um, I guess some of the challenges that as you get into as you adopt that goal of I'm going to teach generative AI or I'm going to teach automation, you run into the question of what tool am I going to use to teach this? And how do I teach this in such a way that it's not tool dependent so that I need the audience to have some hands-on experience, but if they go into a school that uses another tool, I don't want to cripple them from being able to take what they're learning and adopt and apply that to somewhere else. So I think those are the kinds of questions that educators are wrestling with. Well, how do I give that experience, but not just limit the experience to a single tool or a single couple tools? And I think people are still working that out. I suspect, given some time and space, educators like myself and others will figure that out and be able to incorporate that into their busy schedules as we do as professors.
I'm going to throw an unwritten question at you.
Great.
Can you talk about how we know that when we're looking at AI, there's so much that AI can do, but when we're looking at AI in education, we also know that the teacher is critical and we have to keep
Mhm.
that teacher in the loop. Can you talk about how you keep that human in the loop when we're looking at automated scoring and how maybe that's something that can translate into the preparation world?
Oh yeah, I love that. So when I start with, yeah, I like that. That's a very nice way to think about. It's a very specific example to think about how we can keep that human in the loop. Yeah, I like that. So when I work with teachers, the first thing I say is, here's what this automated writing evaluation thing can do, and here's what it cannot do, and what you should know it is unable to do. Here are the limits. Here's what it can do. Here's what it cannot do. So for example, the tool that I use most frequently in my research is called the letter M, the letter I, MI, write. And MI write uses a prompt generic scoring model, which means if you create a prompt, I create a prompt, a teacher creates a prompt, you can embed it in the system and you can use the automated scoring for that prompt. The alternative is that it's a prompt specific scoring model where it only scores for prompts that it's been trained on. The benefit of a prompt generic model is that we could use local curricula. The limitation of a prompt generic scoring model is it does not score for content. So let's say the prompt is to talk about, um, going to outer space, but the student decides to write about going to Friendly's for dinner, but they write beautifully. The scoring system is going to say, that was awesome. Good job. You got a good score. Where a teacher or anybody else, like, you didn't follow the prompt. What are you even writing about? This is, very low scoring. So immediately when working with the teachers, it's very clear to start to think about division of labor. So that's the kind of how I think about this. Here's what the system is going to look at, which frees you up from looking at other things. Here's what the system does not look at, which means you absolutely have to take responsibility for this piece. And I think that analogy of changing the division of labor, which is a common framework within like activity theory, we think about division of labor. If you adopt that lens, is probably something we can generalize to thinking about a generative AI tool. What does this thing do for you or for your students? What doesn't it do? What then requires your greater attention and effort? It's not that the teacher, and I always say to teachers too, like, don't have the misconception that you're going to have 100% effort and you're going to go down to 50% effort. That's a misconception. New challenges are going to arise with this technology. It's just that the way that you distribute that 100% effort is just going to shift. We're going to be focusing on new things, and perhaps it shifts you into a way that's positive. You're focusing more on content. You're not an editor anymore. I say to teachers, you didn't go to school to become an editor. If you did that, you would have got a different job. You want to help them grow their thinking, grow their mind, grow their quality, grow their expression. Great, you could do that now. Focus on that. There may be new challenges though. The system says I'm doing a great job. You said I'm not. What's happening here? So that you're still gonna be doing effort, but is it shifting you in a place that you think is overall cost benefit productive, or is it shifting you in a place where it's not? If you're having too many of those negotiation conversations about, you know, this is saying one thing, I'm saying another, maybe that's not how you want to spend your energy, and maybe that tool isn't useful, or we need to rethink how we're using it. And I think those same kind of conversations about what it can do, what it can't do, what you need to do accordingly, how is this going to shift your division of labor? I think those are the kinds of conversations that may be productive and useful, and effective to have with teachers of all types when we're thinking about AI.
What implications do you see for the future of research, and what are some questions we might be asking in the future?
Oh, I'm so excited about the future of this topic.
Me too.
Yeah, I think I still don't think we've cracked. I'm not sure what the metaphor is here. Crack the egg, or like got to the center of the Tootsie Roll Pop. Whatever the best metaphor is. I don't think we've got there yet with how best to craft feedback that works. Um, the study that I told you about, where the students with disabilities used automated feedback to improve their writing, that if you looked at the feedback, it wasn't amazing. I mean, it was pretty basic. Some might say even rudimentary, not that great feedback. When you compare that to what a teacher can provide, teachers can provide way better feedback. So I think there's a lot, but we still see a lot of response from students, even with feedback that's pretty like low hanging fruit, or like pretty simple feedback, suggesting that they may or might not be getting it otherwise, um, or that the real need for that. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement to take generative AI, and I mean, it provides lots of great feedback. So if we can start to really craft tools that are grade and age and skill appropriate to take its impressive language capabilities and really think about what do we know works with feedback? How much feedback? What are we going to focus on? What are we going to prioritize in this feedback? I think the sky's the limit with what we can do with AI, because now we have a technology that can kind of catch up with research and provide a window to do that research, or an opportunity to do that research. I think with scoring, there's a lot of work being done in how we can put automated scoring, which used to be in the hands of very only like companies, basically. Now any teacher can take an essay and put it to ChatGPT or whatever and say, score this, here's a rubric, score it. So I think there's a lot of work needs to be done around sort of best practices for classroom-based automated scoring. And some of the work that I've been doing is sort of pushing back on that approach and saying, you know, just doing that is probably not enough. We need to do a little bit more elaborate prompting to get something useful. If you're going to take the score and actually like put some consequences to it. You're going to put that score in your grade book, or you're going to like, that's the score they got. So I think there's just so much, and I do think, stepping out a little broader, I have been thinking a lot about the future of writing instruction as a whole, and what is writing going to look like now. I mean, if Microsoft Word has ChatGPT enabled, the change from going from a typewriter, which is a very linear way of writing, to word processing, where now we can rearrange, cut and paste, move things around, that changed our cognition. That our process changed. And now with the ability to finish a paragraph, draft an outline, take an outline, create a draft, uh, take my draft, create an outline back to see if it's actually saying what I want. Writing as a whole is going to change. And I don't think, so we have to sort of think about what that change is going to be. And then our instruction as a whole, where I think we're going to have a whole new way of teaching writing as we catch up to what writing is going to look like post ChatGPT.
I'm excited. I
Yeah.
mean, like, I can't wait. Well, you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I just want to bring it out into the open. Research shows that teachers are not comfortable teaching writing, aren't comfortable providing feedback.
Mm.
and therefore aren't doing it in a timely manner. So, or explicitly, all the pieces that are so important to feedback. And so, we're looking at automated scoring. We're looking at ways to provide that feedback to improve student writing outcomes in the long term. What are some other things that teacher preparation programs should consider around the topic of writing, automation, instruction, feedback, etc., as we're moving forward?
I love that. Yeah, thank you. Great question. I say that a lot too. It's like we expect teachers, it's just almost just it's taken for granted that we expect teachers to provide feedback. But do we ever explicitly teach teachers about feedback or like, here's different ways you can give feedback. Here's how to think about feedback. Here's what works. Here's what doesn't. We don't have those kinds of conversations, unfortunately, in our preparation programs. We should. And feedback should go from being sort of supposed to being taught, I think. That's the first thing. And you're right. It's difficult to do. It's difficult to give good feedback. It's also it's time consuming. Um, there's so much going wrong in an essay, it's hard to know where to start. And you feel like, oh my God, what do I prioritize? So the question of like, what do I look at? What do I prioritize? How do I communicate this? There's a lot of decisions a teacher needs to make. And if you have students who never read it and never act on it, it becomes, you don't get reinforced to do it more, especially when there's all those costs involved. So the the cost benefit, the sort of reward system can be sort of lacking for teachers, I think. They'll even say like, why should I even do this if they don't even look at it? That it's like, what am I doing? So it would be interesting too. Another area of research going back to that we might want to connect with preparation is like, let's do research on using generative AI to give feedback on teachers' feedback. It'd be really cool. Like, here's some feedback I gave. Can you help me understand, would you suggest rephrasing this like people do with emails? Like, here's an email to my boss. Can you rephrase this to say like be whatever? It would be interesting for teachers to have some opportunities, maybe structured as they learn about best practices and feedback, to actually use AI, a chatbot, to gain some sort of insight and reflection on their own in a very safe way. Like there's no risk in revealing anything to an AI. You're not, it's very safe space to say like, here's some feedback I gave to my student. They're not applying it. How can I improve this? That might be really interesting and productive for teachers.
That's a really interesting idea. I really like that. It's a fun, novel approach to using AI. Last question: as as faculty and teachers and pre-service teachers are watching this and they're wanting to dive into automated feedback and learn more about it, are there any specific technologies you would suggest for them to play around with, or that you found really useful in this space?
Yeah. So I do think like a real available one to everyone is probably ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, any of those free large language models. I think it's a fantastic space to play around with. And you could give it a piece of text. We don't want to give it student names. So we want to give de-identified information. But we can say like this was text written by a third grader, and give it the prompt and then say, identify, and then kind of, I would suggest asking it. You could try the difference between asking it for open-ended feedback, play with your prompt engineering a little bit. What sort of feedback would you give to this student to improve their writing? You could try there, or you could say, list 5 things a student should do and then prioritize them in the most important that will have the greatest impact on their writing quality, and see what it comes up with. And it would be also interesting too, as teachers are starting to play around with this. Before we started talking, you talked about, you didn't say these words, but sort of like technological pedagogical content knowledge. I'm sure you were thinking about TPAC as you were talking about your things. So one thing that would be interesting too, that would help teachers to learn about the AI as they're learning about AI giving feedback. What teachers can do to learn about AI in terms of its accuracy or not is score those or write down on a piece of paper the feedback you would give to that student. What are the things you would prioritize? And do that for 3, 4, or 5 students piece of writing, and then see what the chatbot says, and then look at like what does it seem to prioritize? Is this the same of mine? Is it how calibrated and close is it to my priorities? And could you potentially, as you look to see those discrepancies, is there's a way that you can make the system be more like you? I prioritize, you can, maybe your next prompt is, these are the things that I prioritize when I give feedback to students. Now, give me feedback along these things. So they can start to have both insight into feedback and themselves, as well as what the AI might be doing without proper guidance and how they can sort of steer it better. And so, yeah, so I think that that might be a lovely approach to build all those sorts of competencies.
And that's such a great, easy way for teachers to start getting their hands into automated feedback because it's so accessible, it's right there. Um, Thank you so much for joining us today and for this great conversation. I'm really excited to learn more about your work and to dive in more. And we'll see you next time on CIDDL's Research to Practice Brief. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.